They told you death is the end, a final breath, a full stop. But what if that is not true? What if the moment your heart stops is the moment something far more ancient begins? For thousands of years, we have feared what comes after. We have been trained to look away, to call it unknowable, to surrender it to myth. But one civilization looked straight into the heart of death and did not flinch. The ancient Egyptians left us something, not a book of superstition, a map, a guide for the soul, a technology of consciousness, disguised as a funeral text. And most people have never read it because they told us it was a myth, because they needed us to forget. But today, you are going to remember. Imagine this. You are standing at the edge of everything you've ever known. The breath is gone, the body still, but awareness somehow is still there. A low hum surrounds you. You are not afraid. You are not alone. In the darkness ahead, a path begins to form, carved not from stone, but from memory. Symbols float like stars. Voices whisper words you've never learned, but somehow always known. This is the beginning. This is the duat. And this is the story they tried to bury in sand and silence. But the soul never forgets, and neither will you. You have felt it, that quiet, nagging sense beneath the surface of everyday life. The feeling that something vital has been hidden, not stolen, just buried. Like a memory you were never supposed to remember. From childhood, you were taught about death. Maybe it came wrapped in religion, or in silence, or in science. A heaven for the good, a hell for the bad, or worse, nothing. Just a switch flipped off in the dark. But even then, something in you resisted. Not because you were afraid, but because you sensed that the truth had more weight than the answers you were given. It wasn't rebellion. It was recognition. Because the truth is, death was never the end. And deep down, some part of you already knows that. For the ancient Egyptians, this knowing wasn't a mystery. It was a foundation. They didn't guess about the afterlife. They built an entire civilization around it. To modern minds, that sounds strange, unfamiliar, obsessive, even. But to them, preparing for death wasn't morbid. It was wise. It was sacred. They saw the moment of death not as a collapse, but as a crossing, not the end of the story, but the beginning of the soul's true unfolding. What they left behind was not religion as we know it today. It was a system, a science of the soul, a record of consciousness, of memory, of spiritual navigation, and it was encoded in what we now call the Book of the Dead. The name itself is misleading. It makes it sound like a manual for corpses, but that was never the point. The original name of these texts was the Book of Coming Forth by Day, coming forth, emerging, awakening. This was not about death. It was about light. The Egyptians believed the soul was not one thing, but many, not a ghost trapped in the body, but a set of layered intelligences. Ka, ba, ah, the vital force, the roaming essence, and the divine radiance of awakening. And they believed that without preparation, these aspects of the soul would become confused after death, lost in illusion, trapped in cycles, echoing through realms without memory of their origin. So they mapped it. They mapped what came after, not metaphorically, not artistically, but with precision. The Book of the Dead was their tool, not to comfort the grieving, but to guide the traveler being you. This map was placed in tombs, not as decoration, but as a manual for navigating a multi-dimensional landscape that was both cosmic and interior. Because to the ancient Egyptians, the outer world and the inner world were not separate. They were mirrors. Death, to them, was the moment the mirror turned inward, a time when everything you had ignored, avoided, or buried would rise to meet you. That was not punishment. It was opportunity. And this is where their brilliance begins to show. They didn't describe death as a place where gods judged and condemned. They described it as a process of resonance. Each part of the journey after death was structured around a simple but powerful principle. You will meet what you are, not what you believe, not what you claim, but what you carry, your frequency, your choices, your memory. The gates you pass through after death are not locked by someone else. They respond to your vibration. And so, the entire Book of the Dead can be seen as a vibrational tuning guide, a manual for becoming aligned with truth, with clarity, with lightness. In this way, death was not something to fear. It was something to prepare for, to engage with, to understand, and through that understanding, to live more fully. That is perhaps the most radical part of their teaching, that the study of death was never about dying. It was about living intentionally, soulfully, with awareness. This is where modern culture has gone numb. We treat death as failure. We hide it in hospitals and funeral homes. We strip it of ritual, of meaning, of preparation. We teach people to pursue longevity, but not depth. But if you look at the way the Egyptians lived, you will see that everything they built, temples, tombs, rituals, art, wasn't about worshiping death. It was about mastering transition, because they knew that if you could meet death with your eyes open, you would have already done the most important work a soul could do. And so, the Book of the Dead became a living document, a layered guide encoded with images, spells, affirmations, and archetypes, not to be read once and stored away, but to be studied, recited, internalized. Each spell was not a charm. It was a key, a tuning fork that aligned your soul with the frequencies needed to pass each threshold. Each deity was not a god to be appeased, but an aspect of your own consciousness. Each test was not a punishment, but a mirror. And this, perhaps more than anything, is the message we are now being invited to remember, that death is not final. It is a mirror. It is a fire that burns away what is false, so what is real can remain. And if you prepare, if you walk through life with presence, with alignment, if you know how to meet your own shadows before they rise to meet you, then the afterlife becomes not a judgment, but a return to source, to soul, to self. This was their secret, hidden in tombs, etched in stone, wrapped in papyrus and ritual and gold. But the gold was not the treasure. The treasure was the knowing, the reminder you were never meant to fear the end. You were meant to remember your way through it. And that memory is starting to surface again, not just in ancient texts, but in near-death experiences, in dreams, in meditations, in the moments of silence when something deeper speaks, because the truth has never been gone. It has only been waiting for the soul to listen again. And now, maybe, you are ready, because this isn't just history. It is invitation. And this journey, the one the Egyptians mapped so carefully, it doesn't begin when your heart stops beating. It begins when your eyes open to the truth. And now, to understand how that map actually works, we must look deeper into the spells, the symbols, and the soul parts they were designed to guide. This is where the true journey begins. Let us now step into part 2, the Forgotten Soul Map. What the Book of the Dead really was. It was never meant to be called the Book of the Dead. That name came much later, given by foreign scholars who looked at the scrolls found in tombs and assumed they were religious texts, filled with spells and myth designed to comfort grieving families or serve primitive beliefs. But that is not what it was. The true name, in the ancient Egyptian tongue, was the Book of Coming Forth by Day, not a book about death, a book about awakening. It was not written for the dead. It was written for the soul that is becoming And the Egyptians knew something that we are only now beginning to remember, that the journey of the soul is not linear, and death is not the end, but one gate along a much longer path. It did not begin as a single book. What we now call the Book of the Dead was, in fact, a growing collection of incantations, images, instructions, affirmations, and sacred geometry. Over centuries, it was added to, refined, and adapted for different tombs, different lives, and different states of consciousness. It was painted on walls, carved in stone, written on scrolls, and even whispered during rituals. Each version was unique. Each soul had a different journey, and the map adjusted accordingly. But at its core, the purpose was always the same: to guide the soul through the invisible terrain beyond the body, not in metaphor, not in poetry. In practice, this was a soul map. Imagine for a moment that your body has just taken its final breath. Your mind is quiet, but your awareness is still intact. You begin to sense something stirring movement in a place that has no direction. And suddenly, a question forms, not from the outside, but from within you. Where am I? That is when the journey begins. To the Egyptians, this moment was sacred, not terrifying, not confusing, sacred, and it required preparation. Just as we would not send someone into a desert without a compass, they would not send a soul into the next world without instructions. So what exactly was in this map? It was not a list of commandments. It was not a history book or a mythological tale. It was a layered system of symbolic instruction. At its simplest level, it included spells or utterances, which were vibrational keys spoken aloud to align the soul with divine order. Illustrations, which depicted scenes from the journey gates, guardians, and the weighing of the heart. Prayers and affirmations, designed not to plead for mercy, but to declare resonance with cosmic balance. Lists of names, not to memorize, but to recognize energies and archetypes the soul would encounter. And beyond all of that, it contained frequencies. Yes, frequencies, because the Egyptians believed that the written word, when spoken with intention, created sound vibrations that shaped reality. Each spell in the text was not a metaphor. It was a tool, a frequency match for each threshold the soul must pass through. But why so much complexity? Why so many parts? Because the soul, as they saw it, was not singular. To them, you are not just a soul. You are a composite being. You are Ka, the vital energy. You are Ba, the personality and emotional self. You are Ach, the radiant immortal consciousness. And you are more. Each part of you has a role in life and a role in death. When you die, the Ka returns to source. The Ba must journey, and the Ak must awaken if the journey is successful. But without guidance, the Bia can become lost. It can wander, stuck in confusion, fear, or illusion. That is why this map exists, to bring the Ba home, to activate the Ach, to help the full self remember what it truly is. This is not just about death. It is about alignment. When the body ends, you do not become someone new. You become more deeply who you already were. And the parts of yourself that you ignored, denied, or suppressed in life, they will rise again in death, not to punish, but to be met. This is why the spells and illustrations were filled with gates and guardians. Each one was designed to mirror a part of you. You don't fight them. You recognize them. You speak to them, not to ask for passage, but to show you are ready. And being ready means you are resonating with truth. The Book of the Dead is, in that sense, a mirror, but it is a mirror crafted with extraordinary care. It does not just show you who you are, it shows you who you can become. Why does this matter now? Because this is not just a story about the ancient past. It is a map you are still carrying somewhere deep within your being, even if you have never read a spell, even if you have never seen a papyrus scroll. You are already on this journey. And that means this knowledge is not for scholars. It is for seekers, for those who feel the pull, for those who want to live with eyes open, for those who are tired of running from death and ready to walk toward truth. You do not need to believe in Egyptian gods to feel what this is. You just need to listen, because the soul already knows the way. It only needs to remember. And now that we have uncovered what the book truly was, a guide, a frequency map, a soul technology, it is time to go deeper, to understand how each gate works, how each trial unfolds, and how each step forward is not judged by others, but by the alignment of your own vibration. Let us now step into the real terrain of the afterlife, the multi-layered realm known as the Duat, a place not made of clouds or fire, but of memory, mirror, and truth. You've seen them before, painted on tomb walls, etched in stone, figures with falcon heads, jackal faces, eyes that seem to follow you across time. At first glance, they look like myth, strange, otherworldly, a pantheon of forgotten gods in a dead religion. But what if they're not just gods? What if they're blueprints, codes, living archetypes designed to speak not to your mind, but to your soul? Because in the ancient Egyptian tradition, symbols were never decoration. They were instruction. And deities were not characters in a story. They were mirrors of you. This is where the modern eye often misses the point. We look at Anubis, the jackal-headed god, and see a figure of myth. But to the initiated Egyptian, Anubis wasn't an external being. He was something much closer. He was the inner guide, the intuition refined from instinct, the quiet knowing that walks you through the dark. He represented the part of you that does not panic in transition, but moves with clarity between worlds. And when you were dying, when the veil thinned and fear tried to rise, Anubis was the still presence that reminded you, you are not alone. You know the way because you've walked it before. Then there is Ma'at, the goddess of truth, balance, and cosmic order, always shone with a single feather on her head. But Ma'at was never meant to be worshipped. She was meant to be embodied. She is the frequency of rightness, the still point at the center of your being. Every time you speak your truth, even when it is inconvenient, every time you act with integrity, even when no one is watching, you are aligning with Ma'at. And in the afterlife, it is her feather that balances your heart on the scales, not to punish, but to reveal how much of you is still carrying what was never yours to hold. Symbols in this system were never one-dimensional. They were multi-layered keys, vibrational codes designed to work across body, mind, and energy. Take the Eye of Horus. To most, it looks like an ancient drawing, but the proportions of the eye align with the anatomy of the human brain, specifically the thalamus and pineal gland. Coincidence, or were they telling us something? That sight is not limited to the eyes. That seeing is an inner act. And the Eye of Horus is not just protection from outside harm. It is the return of inner vision. It is the moment you remember how to see from the soul. Even the ritual objects held frequencies. The crook and flail, held by Osiris, were not royal accessories. They represented the twin forces required for inner mastery, compassion and discipline, softness and strength. The crook to draw in, the flail to release what no longer serves. This was the secret of sovereignty, not over others, but over yourself, because Osiris, too, was never just a god. He was the archetype of the awakened witness, the part of you that sees clearly without distortion. The presence within that does not react, does not judge, but simply allows truth to rise. And when the soul reaches the chamber of judgment, It is not Osiris who passes sentence. It is you, seen fully by that presence. Every god, every symbol, every gesture in the Book of the Dead had a purpose. They formed a language, but not a language of words, a language of memory, because these symbols were not designed to teach you something new. They were designed to help you remember what you already knew. Before the forgetting. That's why so many people, even today, report a strange familiarity when they see these images, a stirring, a recognition, not from the mind, but from the soul, because these symbols were built for the soul. They were never meant to be read like a book. They were meant to be activated. So how did this activation work? Through ritual, through sound, through intention. When a priest painted the image of a god onto the walls of a tomb, he did not simply recreate it from memory. He traced it with mantra. He breathed sound into it. He sang into it a frequency. When a spell was spoken over a mummified body, it was not superstition. It was vibration. Words were power, and that power was in their resonance. Each word aligned the soul with a certain field, a zone of safety, of remembrance, of guidance, because the journey after death was not just about passing tests. It was about navigating fields of frequency. And this brings us to the deepest truth of all. The Egyptians did not separate the sacred from the practical. To them, symbolism was not separate from survival. To light incense was not just to make fragrance. It was to open a dimensional gateway. To pour water was not just an act of cleansing. It was a statement. She nice. I am returning to flow. Every gesture had layers, and every layer affected the soul. This is what modern spirituality often misses. That true power lies not in abstraction, but in living ritual, in knowing that the symbols around you still speak, if you are willing to listen. And maybe that is why this wisdom was buried. Not because it was outdated, but because it was too powerful. Because a person who understands these symbols does not fear death. A person who walks with Maat in their chest, who hears Anubis in the silence, who carries the eye not on their wall, but behind their forehead. That person cannot be controlled. That person remembers. And once you remember, you cannot go back to forgetting. So as we begin to see these deities not as gods above us, but as aspects within us, we start to decode something far more important than ancient art. We begin to decode ourselves, and from that place of deep remembering, we are now ready to enter the next stage of the journey, the place between worlds, the realm of reflection, the place the Egyptians called the Duat, a space where the soul meets itself, layer by layer, and nothing can be hidden. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine you are no longer tethered to your body. The final breath has left your chest. But strangely, you are still aware, not in fear, not in confusion, just presence. There is no bright tunnel, no pearly gate, only silence, and then movement. A vast space opens before you. It is not darkness, but depth. It breathes, it watches, and you know, without knowing how, that it is alive. This is not the void. This is not oblivion. This is the Duat. To the ancient Egyptians, the Duat was not a place of eternal rest or torment. It was not heaven. It was not hell. It was a realm of passage, a sacred terrain through which the soul must journey after death, not to be judged, but to be revealed. It was layered, symbolic, and ever-shifting, and most of all, it was interactive. The Duat was not a static realm. It responded to you, to your vibration, to the weight of your heart, to the clarity of your memory, to the alignment of your truth. In other words, the Duat did not show you what was real. It showed you who you really are. But what exactly was the Duat? Ancient texts describe it in poetic terms. 12 gates, river crossings, serpent guardians, fire lakes, upside-down mountains. But all of that was metaphor, or more accurately, symbolic architecture, because the duat, in essence, was not out there. It was within. It was a map of consciousness. Each chamber reflected a part of the soul's journey inward. Each obstacle was a representation of an inner fear, attachment, or unresolved distortion. And so, this was not a realm you could fake your way through. You could not perform your way past its gates. You could not lie to its guardians, because the only language the duat understood was resonance. Let's step through this together. The moment the soul enters the duat, it is met with the first threshold, confusion, not because the realm is malicious, but because the soul, having just left form, still clings to what it thought it was, the name, the story, the memories of separation. This confusion is not punishment. It is a fog, and to move beyond it, the soul must remember who it was before the identity, before the fear, before the mask. This is why, in the ancient scrolls, the first spells are often affirmations, declarations of alignment, not to inform the gods, but to remind the soul. As the journey continues, the duat becomes more symbolic, more mirrored. You pass through gates, each one guarded by beings, some terrifying, others serene. But they are not enemies. They are frequencies. They test your vibration, not with words, but with presence. If you stand before a gate and carry fear, it will rise. If you carry shame, it will echo. If you carry clarity, it will open. You do not fight your way through the duat. You remember your way through. You speak the right names. You declare the right truths, not as incantation, but as alignment, because every gate responds to authenticity. One of the most iconic gates is the Hall of Two Truths. Here, the soul comes before the scales. On one side, the heart, on the other, the feather of Ma'at. And the question is not, were you perfect? It is, are you light? Not light in image, light in energy, in self-honesty, in release, because the heart, in Egyptian understanding, was more than a symbol of feeling. It was a recorder. It carried every memory you did not resolve, every truth you swallowed, every moment you betrayed yourself to belong. And so, this moment was not a courtroom. It was a mirror. If the heart was heavy, not from sin, but from forgetting, then the soul would be unable to pass. It was not cast down in punishment. It simply returned to confusion, back into the fog, back into the loop, until it was ready to remember again. This journey through the duat was not one size fits all. Each soul experienced it differently, because each soul carried different frequencies. The landscape of the duat shifted in response. Some saw rivers of fire, some luminous corridors, some beasts, some mentors. But all of it, every image, every form, was the soul's own vibration made visible. That's what made the journey so personal, so sacred. You were not judged. You were revealed, and what was revealed was not the person you pretended to be, but the presence you truly are. Now, pause here for a moment. Consider how this changes everything we've been taught about death. No throne, no distant God passing sentence, no eternal reward or punishment based on behavior. Instead, a realm that responds to you, a passage made of resonance, a mirror made of memory. That is the duat, not a fantasy, not a metaphor, a system, a technology of consciousness built not to terrify, but to transform. And perhaps the most profound part, the Egyptians believed you didn't have to wait until you died to enter the duat. They believed that you could touch it now, in dreams, in visions, in deep meditation, in moments of silence, in the space between breaths, in ritual, in grief, in loss, in surrender. Anytime the ego cracks open, the duat peers through, because the duat is not about death. It is about awakening. And the more you face your own illusions while living, the less you'll fear the passage when it comes, because you will have already walked the path. You will have already met the gatekeepers, and you will already carry the names they need to hear. This was the heart of Egyptian preparation, not fear, not superstition, but readiness. They mummified the body not to preserve flesh, but to preserve energy. They painted tomb walls not as art, but as activation. They recited spells not as prayers, but as tuning forks, and all of it, every symbol, every ritual, every chant, was aimed at one thing: to help the soul remember itself in the place where nothing else remains. Today, we may not mummify, we may not recite hieroglyphic incantations, but the duat still waits, not in the future, but in the silence behind our thoughts, in the moments when life cracks open and something ancient stirs. That stirring, that call, is the same one the Egyptians felt, the call to return, not to a place, to a state of presence, of clarity, of weightlessness, where your frequency becomes the key and your truth opens the way. In the next part of this journey, we step into one of the most powerful gates within the duat, the weighing of the heart, a ritual so often misunderstood, so often simplified, but behind it lies one of the deepest teachings of the ancient world, a truth not about judgment, but about freedom, because how light your heart becomes is not determined when you die. It is shaped by how you live. Let us now explore that sacred moment and the spell that echoes through time. Picture this: you are standing in a hall of silence. Before you, a great scale. On one side rests your heart, on the other, a single feather. Not just any feather, the feather of Ma'at, truth, harmony, universal order. No thunder, no fury, no courtroom drama, just balance, stillness, clarity. This is not the trial you were taught to fear. This is not about sin or salvation. This is about resonance, and here, everything false falls away. This scene, the weighing of the heart, is one of the most iconic images in ancient Egyptian spirituality. It appears on tomb walls, in papyrus scrolls, etched into golden sarcophagi. And yet, most people today misunderstand it. They see it as judgment. They imagine Osiris as a god who condemns. They view the heart as a moral ledger. Heavy equals failure. Light equals reward. But that was never the purpose. To the ancient Egyptians, this was not about being punished. It was about being seen, fully seen, by the universe, by your own soul. At the center of this ritual lies spell 125, not just a prayer, not just a poem. It is an affirmation, a declaration of alignment. It begins not with fear, but with presence. The soul steps forward and speaks. I have not stolen. I have not lied. I have not slain. 32 declarations, each one simple, each one powerful, not to convince a god, but to speak your own vibration into form. Because the Egyptians understood something modern society forgets. Words are not just communication. They are calibration. To speak these truths is not to recite. It is to realign. Each statement clears the fog, retunes the field, anchors the soul in remembrance. But let's go deeper. What is the heart? In this context, in ancient Egypt, the heart was not simply an organ. It was the seat of consciousness, not the brain. The heart, it recorded everything, not just actions, but intentions. Not just what you did, but why you did it. It held every lie you told yourself, every truth you were too afraid to live, every grudge, every guilt, every fear you never faced. And in the moment of weighing, nothing is hidden. But that's not meant to scare you. It's meant to free you. Because here, in the Hall of Two Truths, you are not being measured against perfection. You are being asked one question. Did you live in alignment with yourself? Let's return to the feather. Ma'at was not a distant goddess demanding obedience. She was the embodiment of balance, of order, of truth, without distortion. Her feather symbolizes your natural state, not who you tried to be, not who others wanted you to be, but who you were beneath the noise, before the fear. And the only reason your heart becomes heavy is because you forgot, you held on, you swallowed truths, you wore masks, you chased approval, you feared rejection, not because you were wrong, but because you were human. And so, the weighing is not a punishment. It's a mirror, a gift. It shows you what still needs to be released, not to shame you, but to liberate you. And then there is Amit, the creature that waits by the scales, part lion, part crocodile, part hippopotamus, the devourer of hearts deemed too heavy. It sounds terrifying, but again, this is not about fear. Amit is not a monster. Amit is transformation. She consumes only what cannot pass, only what is still clinging, still dense, still misaligned. She does not destroy you. She dissolves what is no longer you, what is left behind. Only what is real, only what is light. And this is where spell 125 becomes so profound. Each phrase, I have not spoken falsely, I have not caused pain, I have not closed my ears to truth, is not a checklist. It is an invitation to live now in a way that keeps your heart light. Because the weighing of the heart doesn't just happen once. It happens in small moments, every day. When you choose silence over speaking your truth, when you act out of fear instead of integrity, when you deny what you know, just to be accepted. Each of those moments leaves a trace, not a sin, a weight, and those weights gather quietly until one day they tip the balance, but they don't have to, because the Book of the Dead is not about judgment after death. It is about practice during life. So how do we practice spell 125 now? Not by memorizing it, but by living its essence, by watching our choices, by speaking truth gently, but consistently, by examining our motives, by forgiving what we are still carrying, by softening the heart, not to be weak, but to remember how to be real. This is how we align with Ma'at, not by following rules, but by returning to resonance, because Ma'at is not law. She is balance. She is the middle way, the still point between extremes, the breath between reaction and awareness. And that balance lives in you. You know, when something feels off, you feel it in your chest, in your gut, in the way your energy contracts or expands. This is your compass. This is your inner Ma'at. And the more you trust it, the lighter your heart becomes, not because life is perfect, but because you are no longer pretending, you are no longer carrying what was never yours. You are no longer fighting to be something you are not. You are simply being, and that is enough. So when you think about death and the rituals that await the soul, remember this: there is no judgment day waiting to punish you. There is only truth waiting to meet you. And if you live in that truth now, death will be no enemy. It will be the homecoming your soul has been preparing for all along. Because the scale is not about morality. It is about memory. And the lighter your heart, the more clearly you will remember who you truly are. Now, with the scales before us, and spell 125 still echoing in our hearts, we step forward, not with fear, but with awareness, because the next part of the journey is the most personal of all, not through gates or trials, but through ego, the final illusion, the mask that must fall, so the soul can rise. There is a gate that does not appear on the maps. No serpent guards it. No spell unlocks it. No deity names it. But every soul must face it. It is not made of stone. It is not surrounded by fire. It is made of you, and it burns with a quieter flame. It is called the ego, and to pass through it is to die before you die. The Egyptians understood this. Though they never used the modern word ego, they mapped its terrain with stunning clarity. In every trial of the duat, in every gate, every mirror, every guardian, the real confrontation was not with monsters, it was with self-image, the constructed self, the protective shell, the one who clings, controls, pretends, because the soul cannot carry falsehood into the higher realms. It cannot ascend while dragging illusion. And so, at the deepest threshold, you are not asked to be righteous. You are asked to be real. But what is ego death? Let's be clear. It is not the destruction of personality. It is not the erasure of identity. It is the moment you stop believing that you are the identity, the moment the masks fall, the roles dissolve, and what is left is the awareness behind the story. This is not comfortable. It is not gentle. It is not pretty. It is sacred. It is necessary. Because the you that is afraid, defensive, reactive, that is not the real you. It is the you built to survive. And the Book of the Dead was never about survival. It was about remembrance. The ancients knew that ego death was not something that happened once. It was a process, an unfolding, a peeling back of layer after layer of attachment. They saw this as the core of every soul's preparation. You had to die to who you were told to be, to who you pretended to be, to who you thought you were. Only then could the Akh, the radiant, awakened self emerge. So how does ego death begin? It often begins in discomfort, in the loss of control, in the moment where the image you've built no longer fits. Something cracks, a job ends, a relationship breaks, a diagnosis arrives, a loss steals the ground from under your feet. And the voice within says, "This is not who I am." That is the whisper, the start of return, because the ego doesn't surrender when everything is easy. It clings, it fights, it insists that safety lies in control. But that is the great illusion. There is no true safety in pretending to be someone you are not. In the duat, this process is symbolized through trial, but not punishment. Each trial confronts a piece of falsehood. Each guardian reflects a mask. Each gate tests for resonance, not perfection, but truth. And if you are still holding on to old identities, you cannot pass, not because you're being denied, but because the realm responds to frequency. The ego vibrates in fear. The soul vibrates in presence. You can't fake the shift. You must become it. That is why the initiation before death must happen during life. Because if you wait until your final breath to let go, you will bring confusion into the next world. But if you begin now, if you begin softening the ego, unmasking the fear, questioning the narratives, then when death comes, you will already know the way. You will not resist. You will not forget. You will walk with memory intact. You will walk as soul. This process is not foreign. Every authentic spiritual path points to it. In Egyptian temples, in Buddhist monasteries, in shamanic ceremonies, in long, silent nights alone with yourself, they all whisper the same truth. To awaken, you must die before you die, not physically, energetically, emotionally, egoically. And what remains after that death? Not emptiness, not nothing. What remains is presence, stillness, a watching self that does not need approval, does not need control, does not need to win. This is what the Egyptians called the Akh, the luminous one, the radiant field of soul that can navigate the afterlife with ease because it no longer carries distortion. This was the real goal, not to escape punishment, but to become clear enough to return to source. In modern times, ego death is often romanticized. It is presented as a mystical moment, one powerful meditation, one psychedelic journey. But in truth, it is a path, and it comes in waves. It happens when you stop arguing with what is, when you stop needing to be right, when you stop chasing what others think of you. It happens when truth matters more than comfort, when silence feels more honest than performance, when you choose presence over image. That is ego death, and that is liberation. So when you walk into your life today, into conversations, choices, relationships, ask yourself, what am I protecting? What am I proving? What would I do right now if I did not need to maintain this version of myself? These questions are keys, not just for personal peace, but for the gates that lie beyond this world, because the self you carry with you at the moment of death will determine how far you can go. And so, the real gate is not guarded by monsters. It is guarded by your own resistance, your own need to remain someone you are not. But the moment you lay that down, even for a breath, the path clears, not because you were allowed in, but because you finally belonged. And that belonging is not granted. It is remembered. You were never separate. You just forgot. Now you are remembering. In the next part of the journey, we move from individual transformation to cosmic embodiment, because once the ego falls away, once the Ak emerges, the soul no longer wanders. It begins to radiate. It becomes the light itself. And that is the deeper truth behind every afterlife teaching. It's not about where you go. It's about what you become. There are things you were never meant to know, not because they are dangerous, but because they make you free. Because once you remember who you are, you stop being easy to manage. And that is the most terrifying thing. To systems built on control, the Book of the Dead was never meant to be myth. It was a manual, a soul technology, a precise system for navigating consciousness beyond the body. And for a time, it was treated as such, respected, studied, lived, until it wasn't, until it was buried beneath museums, beneath translations, beneath centuries of deliberate forgetting. And the question is, why? Why would something so powerful be hidden? To understand the answer, we must travel not just through space, but through history, because when the ancient world fell, it did not fall all at once. It was dismantled, piece by piece, scroll by scroll, ritual by ritual, and much of that dismantling came not from time, but from empire, from those who saw wisdom not as sacred, but as a threat. When Western powers encountered Egypt, they did not seek to understand it. They sought to possess it. Tombs were looted, sacred artifacts removed, scrolls unrolled under sterile museum lights. The gold was kept, the meaning was lost, and in its place, a story was told that Egypt was obsessed with death, that its symbols were superstition, that its gods were mere myths. The Book of the Dead became a curiosity, a relic, a piece of dead culture, to be studied, catalogued, and dismissed. But the Egyptians were not obsessed with death. They were obsessed with truth, and their texts, if understood, posed a threat to every system built on fear, because the Book of the Dead taught that you do not need a priest to reach the divine, that you do not need to obey to be worthy, that your soul carries its own compass, and that compass responds not to rules, but to resonance. That message is powerful, too powerful. So it was rewritten, redefined, silenced, first by colonial powers who could not understand it, then by religious empires who feared what it revealed. Because the Book of the Dead made one thing clear: you are sovereign, you are sacred, you are responsible for your soul. No intercessor needed, no hierarchy, no approval, just alignment. That is not a message religions can monetize, or that empires can control, and so it had to be discredited. But it didn't stop there. As monotheistic religions took hold, anything that spoke of the soul as multidimensional, anything that honored feminine principles, anything that embraced personal power, was labeled heresy. The gods of Egypt became idols, their rituals pagan, their wisdom sin. And so an entire tradition, rooted in harmony, transformation, and cosmic balance, was buried beneath labels like primitive, polytheistic, and lost. But it was never lost. It was hidden in plain sight, in scrolls behind glass, in books no longer read, in temples stripped of meaning, in stories that were rewritten by the victors. Even science joined the forgetting. In the age of reason and rationalism, anything that could not be measured was ridiculed. Mysticism became madness. Consciousness became brain chemistry. Death became a full stop. The soul, a delusion. But what if the delusion was the forgetting? Because now, science is circling back. Quantum physics is telling us that reality is shaped by observation, that particles exist in multiple states, that consciousness may not come from the brain, but may be received through it. And slowly, we begin to hear echoes of what the ancients always knew, that the universe is conscious, that we are vibrational beings, that death is transition, not termination. But by the time this truth returns, how much has already been lost? Generations grew up, never hearing the word duat, never knowing that the soul had maps, never taught that the weighing of the heart was not about shame, but about returning to balance. Instead, we were given fear, heaven and hell, punishment and reward, control through guilt, obedience over embodiment, and we called that faith. But faith born of fear is not truth. It is spiritual politics, and it has kept humanity small. Why does this matter now? Because the forgetting ends with you. Because you are beginning to remember, to feel the pull, to sense that your soul was never meant to walk blind. You were never meant to fear death. You were meant to prepare for it, to live so clearly, so presently, so lightly, that when the moment comes, you walk forward in radiance. That is what they were trying to show us. Not to worship death, but to meet it awake. This remembrance is not theoretical. It is personal. It is felt in the silence of your doubt, in the ache behind your questions, in the knowing that what you were taught was never the whole story, that there's something ancient inside you rising again. And the more you remember, the less control the systems have, not because you rebel, but because you no longer comply with the forgetting. So what now? You do not need to rebuild the temples. You do not need to memorize the spells. You only need to return to resonance, live with intention, speak with clarity, release what weighs you down, trust what feels true in your bones. That is how you walk the path, not in imitation, but in embodiment, because you are not just remembering Egypt, you are remembering yourself. And in that remembrance, you reclaim the most radical truth of all, that you were never meant to be ruled. You were meant to rise. And now, with the veils of forgetting beginning to fall, you are ready to walk as soul, not in fragments, but in fullness. Because when the world said, the Book of the Dead is dead, what it really meant was, we are not ready for that kind of freedom. But now you are, and the final passage awaits. The place where remembrance becomes embodiment. You've journeyed far, through death, through memory, through gates of illusion, through the silence of forgetting, and now you stand where the ancients hoped every soul would eventually arrive, not at a tomb, not at a temple, but in a truth so simple, you could carry it in your chest, that you do not have to wait for death. To walk the path of the soul, you can live it now. Right here, with breath, with presence, with intention. The Book of the Dead was never just about death. It was about living in a way that prepares you to meet yourself fully. It was about lightening the heart, not because lightness is a virtue, but because a light heart is a clear channel. It is a compass that does not distort, a field that does not trap, a vibration that does not bind. In the duat, the heart must be light, but that lightness begins here, in life, in the choices you make, before the final gate ever appears. So what does it mean to live this way? It does not mean performing rituals from a forgotten time. It does not mean memorizing spells in an ancient tongue. It means tuning yourself, day by day, to the same frequencies the Egyptians encoded, into every symbol, every chant, every image. And you begin with the heart. Start by asking, what am I carrying? What emotion lingers in your chest like a shadow? What fear are you dragging from room to room, even when it no longer belongs? What words have you not said? What truth have you silenced? Not to protect others, but to protect a mask. The heart is not just a muscle. It is a memory field, and every unspoken truth, every repressed feeling, every betrayal of self makes it heavier. Not in morality, but in frequency. You don't need to be good to pass through the gates. You need to be clear. Clarity begins with honesty. Start with 5 minutes a day, not to fix yourself, but to hear yourself. Ask gently, where have I lied to myself today? Where have I said yes when I meant no? Where have I stayed silent, not from wisdom, but from fear? This is not judgment. This is self-remembrance. Every time you catch yourself and realign with your truth, you lighten the load. The scale tips, not through effort, but through release. Next, speak your truth intentionally. Spell 125 was a declaration, not of perfection, but of alignment. I have not stolen. I have not lied. I have not caused pain. These are not moral boasts. They are frequency adjustments. You can create your own. Say them out loud. Feel them, mean them. I am learning to forgive. I honor my truth, even when it is hard. I let go of what is not mine to carry. Speak them until they feel real. Not because the universe needs to hear you, but because you do. Then simplify. The heavier your life becomes, the harder it is to walk with a light heart, not just materially, but emotionally, energetically, mentally. We accumulate so much. Opinions that are not ours, relationships that no longer reflect us, patterns we inherited but never questioned. And each one adds weight, not physical weight, spiritual drag. So simplify, not to escape life, but to make room for soul. Let go of the noise. Release the need to be understood by everyone. Let stillness become part of your rhythm. The duat is a realm of reflection. So is your life. Finally, remember that you are always practicing. Every moment is preparation. Every conversation is a mirror. Every choice is a gate. You don't have to be perfect, but you do have to be honest, because what you rehearse now will echo later, not because someone is watching, but because your soul is listening, and it will carry forward whatever is unresolved, unspoken, unseen. So see it now, speak it now, soften now, not as performance, but as return. Living the teachings is not about looking spiritual. It is about becoming weightless in a world designed to burden you. It is about remembering in a culture that teaches forgetting. It is about walking through your days, not to succeed, but to stay in tune. And when you drift, because we all do, you return again and again, because the journey never asks for perfection, only presence. So live, like someone who remembers, who speaks from their center, who leaves a room lighter than they entered, who can face endings without fear, because they have already practiced letting go. This is the way of the soul, not to escape death, but to meet it without trembling. And when you do, when that final breath arrives, you will not beg for time. You will not recoil in confusion. You will smile, because you have already been walking toward that gate your whole life, and now you are ready. This is what the Book of the Dead has always pointed to. Not myth, not mystery, but mastery. And mastery is not something you earn. It is something you remember and practice until it becomes who you are. So begin, not tomorrow, now. Choose truth. Choose clarity, choose lightness, and watch how the gates begin to open. You are not waiting for the journey. You are already on it, and your heart is the map.